What if I told you that in 1952, a 7-year-old girl in Salem, Oregon predicted the exact moment Mount St. Helens would erupt, 28 years before it actually happened? What if that same child could tell you the last words your grandfather spoke before he died, even though she'd never met him? This isn't fiction. This is the documented case of Emma Morrison, a girl whose gift became her family's greatest treasure and their most terrifying curse. The Morrison family had just moved to Salem from Chicago in the spring of 1952, seeking a fresh start after the war. Robert Morrison, a former Navy officer, had taken a position at the Oregon State Hospital, while his wife Margaret hoped the Pacific Northwest's peaceful atmosphere would help their daughter Emma overcome what doctors in Chicago had dismissed as an overactive imagination. They had no idea they were about to become the center of the most documented case of childhood mediumship in American history. Emma's abilities first manifested during their second week in Salem. The family was having dinner when Emma suddenly stopped eating and stared at the empty chair at the head of their dining table. "The old man says thank you for taking care of his garden," she announced matter-of-factly. Margaret and Robert exchanged confused glances until their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henley, stopped by the next morning. She casually mentioned that the previous owner, an elderly gentleman named Walter, had spent 40 years cultivating the rose garden in their backyard before passing away the previous winter. Emma had never been told about Walter, and the Morrisons had never met him. Dr. James Patterson, a psychiatrist at Oregon State Hospital and Robert's colleague, initially approached Emma's case with clinical skepticism. A Harvard-educated man of science, he assumed he was dealing with a child who had somehow overheard adult conversations and was unconsciously weaving them into elaborate fantasies. That assumption shattered during his first formal session with Emma in June 1952. Dr. Patterson had lost his younger brother David in the Pacific Theater during the war, a tragedy he'd never discussed with anyone at work, including Robert Morrison. During the session, Emma entered what her family had begun calling her listening state, a trance-like condition where she became completely still, her bright blue eyes taking on an almost glassy quality. When she spoke, it was in a voice slightly deeper than her normal 7-year-old cadence. "Your brother says he's sorry about the baseball card," Emma said directly to Dr. Patterson. "He knows you blamed yourself for trading his Mickey Mantle rookie card, but he wants you to know he wasn't angry. He was saving money to buy it back for your birthday, but then the war started." Dr. Patterson's face went white. The baseball card incident had happened when they were children, and David's plan to repurchase it was something only David could have known, as he'd never had the chance to tell anyone before shipping out to the Pacific. But Emma wasn't finished. She described specific details about David's final days on Iwo Jima, information that Dr. Patterson later verified through military records he'd never seen. She knew about David's friendship with a Marine named Tony Castellano from Brooklyn, about the letter David had written but never sent to a girl named Susan back home, and about a promise David had made to their mother just before deployment, a promise only David and their mother had known about. Word of Emma's extraordinary abilities spread quickly through Salem's tight-knit community. The Morrison home began receiving visitors from across Oregon and eventually from neighboring states. Emma's sessions provided grieving families with specific, verifiable information about their deceased loved ones that she couldn't possibly have obtained through normal means. She knew about hidden wills, last-minute confessions, and final messages that brought both comfort and irrefutable proof of her authentic connection to something beyond the physical world. But it was Emma's prediction about Mount St. Helens that would eventually make her case legendary in paranormal research circles. During a session in October 1952 with a Portland family who had lost their son in Korea, Emma suddenly went rigid, her eyes rolling back slightly. When she spoke, it was in a voice none of them recognized, older and more authoritative than any of her previous communications. "The mountain will explode on a Sunday morning in May, in the year that follows the year of the Eagles," she said, her voice carrying an unusual intensity. "The year when the golden boy from California wins the election that changes everything. The trees will fall like dominoes for hundreds of miles, and the ash will darken the sky for 3 days. 57 people will not see Monday." The specific nature of this prediction was unlike anything Emma had previously demonstrated. Dr. Patterson meticulously documented every detail, though none of them could decode what the year of the Eagles, or the golden boy from California, might mean. Emma's abilities continued to intensify throughout 1953 and 1954. She began demonstrating knowledge not just about the recently deceased, but about historical figures and events from Salem's past. During one particularly remarkable session, she provided detailed information about the Willamette Valley's pioneer families, describing specific individuals who had died decades before Emma was born, and revealing the locations of artifacts and documents that were subsequently found exactly where she indicated. Dr. Patterson, now completely convinced of Emma's authenticity, brought in colleagues from Stanford University and the University of California to study her case. The resulting documentation became some of the most comprehensive scientific records of mediumship ever compiled. But the attention also brought unwanted scrutiny from religious groups who denounced Emma as either a fraud or something far more sinister. The situation reached a crisis point in December 1954 when Emma, now 9 years old, made a prediction that would devastate her own family. During what was supposed to be a routine session with Dr. Patterson, Emma suddenly turned to her mother with tears streaming down her face. "Mama," she whispered in her own voice, "Daddy's not coming home from the hospital tomorrow. The man in the green coat will bring news that makes your heart stop. It happens when the big clock strikes 3. Margaret Morrison spent a sleepless night, torn between hoping her daughter was wrong for the first time and dreading that she might be right. Robert had been working late shifts at the hospital, and Margaret had no reason to expect anything unusual. But at exactly 3 o'clock the following afternoon, a man in a green medical coat knocked on their door. Robert Morrison had suffered a massive heart attack during his shift and died instantly. Emma's accurate prediction of her father's death confirmed her abilities beyond any doubt, but the psychological trauma of foreseeing her own family tragedy began to take a visible toll. She became withdrawn, often speaking about too many voices, and complaining that the spirits wouldn't let her sleep. Dr. Patterson noted that Emma seemed to be aging more rapidly than normal, carrying a weight of knowledge that no child should bear. The breaking point came in early 1955 when Emma revealed to her mother that she was beginning to see living people as if they were already dead, experiencing visions of their future deaths. The gift that had brought comfort to so many families was becoming a constant source of anguish for the child who possessed it. On March 15, 1955, Emma Morrison disappeared from her bedroom during the night. An extensive search involving local police, FBI agents, and hundreds of volunteers found no trace of her. She had simply vanished, leaving behind only a note written in her careful cursive. "The voices called me home. Don't be sad, Mama. I'm helping people find peace now." In the decades that followed Emma's disappearance, reports surfaced periodically of a young girl matching her description appearing at sites of major tragedies across America. She was allegedly seen at hospitals during the 1957 Asian flu pandemic, near the site of the 1961 Freedom Riders bus attacks in Alabama, and in Dallas on November 22, 1963. Each sighting described the same pattern: a serious young girl who provided comfort to grieving families before disappearing without explanation. The most significant vindication of Emma's abilities came on May 18, 1980, when Mount St. Helens erupted on a Sunday morning, killing 57 people and devastating hundreds of square miles of forest. The eruption occurred during Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign, and 1980 was indeed an Olympic year, when the American hockey team's Miracle on Ice victory made eagles a symbol of American triumph. Emma's cryptic references to the Year of the Eagles and the Golden Boy from California finally made sense, 28 years after she had spoken them. Dr. Patterson, who continued researching paranormal phenomena until his death in 1987, maintained detailed records of the Emma Morrison case that are now housed at Stanford University. His documentation includes over 200 verified instances where Emma provided accurate information that she couldn't have obtained through normal means, along with 12 documented predictions that later proved accurate. The Morrison house in Salem was eventually converted into a private residence, but subsequent owners reported consistent phenomena: the sound of a young girl's voice during early morning hours, apparitions in the garden where Emma used to play, and an overwhelming sense of peaceful presence that visitors described as comforting rather than frightening. Emma Catherine Morrison disappeared from our world 70 years ago, but her case remains one of the most thoroughly documented examples of childhood mediumship in scientific literature. Her story challenges our understanding of consciousness, death, and the hidden capabilities of the human mind. Whether Emma was a bridge between worlds or a child whose sensitivity allowed her to access information beyond normal perception, her legacy continues to offer hope to those who have lost loved ones and seek evidence that death is not the end of consciousness. The most extraordinary aspect of Emma's case emerged through an unexpected discovery in 1963. Margaret Morrison, who had struggled with alcoholism and depression following her daughter's disappearance, was cleaning out the family attic when she found a sealed envelope tucked behind a loose floorboard in what had been Emma's room. Inside was a series of drawings that Emma had apparently created in secret during the months before her disappearance. The drawings were unlike typical child artwork. Executed in charcoal and colored pencils, they depicted scenes that would later be recognized as major events in American history. One drawing showed a young president in an open car, with dark clouds swirling overhead and the date, November 1963, written in Emma's careful handwriting. Another depicted twin towers reaching toward the sky with birds flying into them, dated simply, September morning, 2001. A third showed a massive wave washing over a coast, with December 26th, and Across the Ocean written beneath it. Dr. Patterson, now in his 70s but still sharp, was immediately contacted about the discovery. His analysis of the drawings revealed details that chilled him to the bone. The president in the car bore an unmistakable resemblance to John F. Kennedy, down to his distinctive hairstyle and facial features. The Twin Towers drawing included architectural details that wouldn't exist until decades later, yet Emma had somehow captured them with photographic accuracy. The wave scene included specific geographical markers that would later correspond exactly to the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was a drawing found at the very bottom of the collection. It showed Emma herself, but older, standing in what appeared to be a vast library filled with floating books and surrounded by translucent figures of people from different time periods. At the bottom, in handwriting that seemed more mature than her previous notes, were the words, "I became the keeper of all their stories. Time isn't a line here, it's a circle, and I can see every point at once." Dr. Patterson shared these drawings with his colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychology professor at Stanford who had been following Emma's case since the 1950s. Dr. Chen's examination revealed something that defied rational explanation. The paper and materials used for the drawings appeared to age at different rates. Some drawings looked exactly as old as they should, given that they'd been hidden for 8 years. Others appeared to have been created recently, despite being found in the same sealed envelope. A few seemed to be aging backwards, appearing newer each time they were examined. The discovery of Emma's prophetic drawings attracted attention from government agencies that had been quietly monitoring unusual cases since the end of World War II. In 1964, Margaret Morrison received a visit from two men who identified themselves as researchers from the Department of Defense. They were particularly interested in any predictions Emma might have made about international conflicts or national security matters. Margaret, still grieving and protective of her daughter's memory, initially refused to cooperate. But when the visitors showed her classified documents about other individuals with similar abilities, she realized that Emma's case was part of a much larger phenomenon that the government had been tracking for decades. The documents revealed that during the Cold War, both American and Soviet intelligence agencies had been actively seeking individuals with psychic abilities for potential espionage and intelligence-gathering purposes. The government researchers revealed that Emma had been under discreet surveillance since 1953, not because they suspected her of being a threat, but because they hoped to understand and potentially harness abilities like hers. They showed Margaret photographs taken from a distance of Emma during some of her sessions, along with audio recordings made with primitive listening devices. The recordings captured Emma's voice, but also picked up what sounded like multiple other voices speaking simultaneously, voices that weren't audible to anyone else present during the sessions. Even more unsettling was the revelation that electromagnetic equipment malfunctioned consistently in Emma's presence. Watches stopped working, radio broadcasts became garbled, and electrical devices experienced unexplained power fluctuations. The government had documented these phenomena as part of their broader investigation into what they termed psychokinetic anomalies, associated with individuals exhibiting psychic abilities. Dr. Patterson learned from the government researchers that Emma's case was unique in its scope and documentation, but she wasn't the only child who had exhibited such abilities during the post-war period. Between 1945 and 1960, they had identified at least 17 children across the United States who demonstrated similar capacities for communication with deceased individuals and precognitive abilities. Most of these children had experienced some form of trauma or loss, and all had eventually either lost their abilities as they matured or had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The researchers theorized that the massive collective trauma of World War II had somehow created conditions that allowed certain sensitive children to access information beyond normal perceptual boundaries. They compared it to the way radio signals can sometimes be picked up by unexpected receivers during atmospheric disturbances, suggesting that the emotional upheaval of global warfare had created psychic static that some children could interpret and decode. Margaret Morrison's cooperation with the government researchers led to the discovery of one final, crucial piece of evidence. Hidden in Emma's bedroom wall, behind a loose brick that the child had apparently removed and replaced, was a small metal box containing a collection of items that seemed to span multiple time periods. Inside were a Civil War-era button, a piece of pottery that archaeologists later determined was from pre-Columbian Native American cultures, a fragment of metal that bore markings consistent with aircraft alloys that wouldn't be developed until the 1970s, and a photograph of a woman who looked remarkably like an adult version of Emma, dated 1987. The implications of these temporal artifacts suggested that Emma's abilities weren't limited to communication with the dead or glimpses of the future. She appeared to have had access to objects from across time itself, as if she existed partially outside the normal flow of temporal progression. Dr. Chen theorized that Emma might have been experiencing what she termed temporal displacement, a condition where consciousness could move freely through different time periods while maintaining awareness of multiple timelines simultaneously. The government's interest in Emma's case intensified when they realized that several of her documented predictions had strategic implications for national security. Her references to Golden Boys from California and specific dates had implications for election outcomes and international relations that wouldn't become clear for decades. They began to wonder if Emma's disappearance had been voluntary or if she had been removed by forces seeking to exploit her abilities. In 1967, 12 years after Emma's disappearance, Margaret Morrison received a package with no return address. Inside was a recent photograph of a young girl who looked exactly like Emma, standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. On the back of the photograph, in Emma's distinctive handwriting, were the words, "I'm still helping, Mama. The work isn't finished yet." The photograph had been taken with equipment that, according to experts, wouldn't be available to civilian photographers for at least another decade. This photograph sparked a new wave of investigation that continued through the 1970s and 1980s. Researchers began collecting reports of a mysterious young girl who appeared at significant historical events across America. She was allegedly photographed in the crowd during Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, standing near the steps of the Capitol during the Watergate hearings, and in the background of news footage from the Challenger disaster. Each time, the girl appeared to be the same age Emma had been at her disappearance, despite decades passing between sightings. Dr. Patterson, who continued his research until his death in 1987, developed a theory that Emma had become what he termed a temporal guardian, an individual whose consciousness had been freed from the constraints of linear time to serve as a bridge between different periods of American history. He believed that her disappearance hadn't been an ending, but a transformation into something beyond normal human existence. The final documented evidence of Emma's continued presence came in 1999, when construction workers renovating the Oregon State Hospital discovered a time capsule hidden in the foundation of the building where Robert Morrison had worked. Inside were letters addressed to specific individuals, written in Emma's handwriting and containing detailed information about events that wouldn't occur for decades after they were written. One letter, addressed to a NASA engineer who wouldn't be born until 1960, contained technical specifications that would prove crucial to preventing a catastrophic equipment failure during a space mission in 2003. Modern researchers continue to study Dr. Patterson's meticulous documentation, and each analysis reveals new aspects of Emma's abilities that defy conventional explanation. Advanced computer analysis of the audio recordings from her sessions has identified voice patterns that suggest she was channeling multiple distinct personalities, each with unique speech characteristics and knowledge bases that corresponded to real historical individuals. The Emma Morrison case has become a cornerstone of modern paranormal research, studied by scientists at institutions including Stanford, MIT, and the University of Virginia. Her story challenges our fundamental understanding of consciousness, time, and the nature of human potential. Whether Emma was a bridge between worlds, a time traveler, or a child whose sensitivity allowed her to access information beyond normal perception, her legacy continues to offer hope to those who have lost loved ones and seek evidence that death is not the end of consciousness. Perhaps some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us that reality contains possibilities we have yet to understand. Emma Morrison's gift transcended the boundaries between life and death, past and future, leaving behind evidence that some connections cannot be broken by mortality. Her disappearance wasn't an ending, but a transformation into something larger than any single lifetime could contain. And somewhere, in the space between what we know and what we hope, a young girl's voice continues to whisper comfort to those who need to hear that death is not goodbye, but simply a different way of being present in the lives of those we love.